The next skill we're going to be looking at is how to empathize. And we want to use this skill anytime we're talking to somebody who is having a really strong emotion when they're upset about something. And it could be sadness, anger, anxiety, stress. By the way, it will work even if you feel like the person with whom you're speaking is overreacting or they really shouldn't feel the way that they feel. It's not about agreeing with them, but we'll be getting into the nuts and bolts of how to do it. So it's hard to talk to someone who's upset. A lot of us just simply don't know what to do or what to say. And it's one of the things that makes it so hard to go to a funeral. You see people that you care about in pain and you want to help them feel better, but you might not necessarily know exactly what you should do or say. So that's why I'm going to walk you through this process. We have all heard about the word empathy. We know it's a good thing. Perhaps you've heard some awesome statistics about emotional intelligence, right? So we know that it leads to strong leadership ability, overall success and happiness. But the problem is, it's a pretty abstract concept. So I really want to break it down and make it more concrete for you in understanding that it is a teachable skill that I can walk you through. So empathy is the ability to identify and relate to another person's emotions, or I should say another being's emotions. Here we have Charles Darwin back in 1872 pointing out that the young and the old of widely different races, both man and animals, express the same state of mind by the same movements. So what does this mean? Basically, Darwin is pointing out that emotions are the greatest common denominator of living species. Similar facial expressions are basically showing us that there's a similar internal state of mind, similar emotional experience that another being is experiencing. And this research has been replicated here in 2017. People like Paul Ekman are able to identify micro expressions. So very, very subtle changes in the muscles in your face show other people what you're experiencing. So Daniel Goleman is an emotional intelligence expert, and he breaks down the concept into 3 different categories. So the first one is cognitive empathy, which is an intellectual understanding of one's emotions. Okay, so that's basically, it makes sense to me that you feel this way. Emotional empathy is attunement, or the ability to relate. If somebody's sad, you're kind of relating to remembering what it was like for you to be sad. And empathic concern takes it to the next level in the form of compassion. So empathic concern is basically, when I see you in trouble, I want to help you out. And that's ultimately the highest form of empathy. We know that empathy builds trust when you are able to understand someone else's emotions and connect to a legitimate sense of basically walking in their shoes. You'll develop a more trusting relationship, whether it's romantic, family, friendship, or business. It's always true. Empathy builds trust. But you might be making it worse. Expressing empathy takes a certain amount of delicacy, and things can go south quickly if you're not careful. So in the next lecture, I'll be showing you some really common pitfalls that people fall into, as well as surefire ways to help people out when they're feeling upset. So now we're going to talk about the nuts and the bolts of how to actually empathize. Like I said, this is probably one of the most important skills that you can possess in a lifetime. And the good news is that these same skills will work whether somebody is feeling angry, whether they're feeling sad, grieving, super frustrated about something, a little kid that's having a temper tantrum. So empathy is really a universal strategy. It will work even if you think somebody's being entirely unreasonable, because you're going through a process within yourself to help you to try to relate to where they're coming from. So, like I said before, empathy is a teachable skill. Many people don't recognize that. The important thing to know is that you don't have to solve the problem. You don't even have to find the right words, but you do have to learn how to connect with your own emotions. Like we said, cognitive empathy is a process of really thinking about why it makes sense that the person in front of you is feeling the way that they're feeling. So cognitive is another word for thoughts. And that's where you're thinking about, okay, they're feeling a feeling and you try to understand why. Oh, I remember this person is sad because they told me the other day that their cat had died. And when that information comes to your brain, that's the first step in beginning to empathize. And sometimes that's enough, but most of the time it's really not. The next level down is emotional empathy. And what we do with emotional empathy is we actually pay attention to the feelings that are coming up within us as we're listening to what's being said. So remember what we said about how emotions are universal, and that's what makes emotional empathy possible. So it's the process of connecting to your own emotional awareness and notice whether or not it's sadness, anger, or fear. So basically what you want to do is pay attention to what it's like to feel that feeling. So in other words, if somebody's sad and you're not sad because your cat didn't die, or maybe you're having a really great day, but you know what it's like to be sad because it's a common experience. So at some point in time, you have been sad. And by going through that process of first understanding the emotion and then relating to it as a common experience, you're one step closer to really connecting to what's going on for that other person. Empathic concern is the deepest form that empathy can take. And just as we talked about when we were talking about defensiveness, we talked about how species would not have survived without self-defense. Well, it also would not have survived without caretaking and nurturing. And we know from Sue Johnson's application of attachment theory to adults that it's not just babies who need to be loved and taken care of. Human beings need one another as well. So when we see that someone else is in pain, someone is very upset about something, this empathic concern is the process of finding compassion. So the question then becomes, okay, you've gone through this process, which is all internal. But I want to remind you, you haven't said a single word. You've just thought about why they're upset, related to your own emotional experience with that feeling, and then notice that you really do want to help. So I'm going to start with what not to do. So as we now move to the phase of what is said out loud, I want to caution you that sometimes attempts at empathic concern can backfire, even though they're coming from a desire to help, they're coming from a place of compassion. But I want to tell you a list of common mistakes. The first one is do not try to cheer the person up, because minimizing the other person's pain will actually maximize it. People often try to cheer somebody up hoping that that's going to make them feel better, but actually it can cause the other person to feel more misunderstood, and sometimes at worst case scenario, they can feel patronized. The other thing that's kind of good news is that you don't have to solve the person's problem in order to help them feel better. Down the line, you might have excellent advice for them, but giving them unsolicited advice too early could actually make things worse and cause them to feel disrespected. So if a surgeon recommended surgery before asking you a whole lot of questions, you'd probably decrease the amount of trust. Whereas if they really listened to you, showed you that they cared, that you have this medical problem, then when they got to the point of advice giving, you would really have much more energy going toward listening to what they are saying. And the third mistake that many of us make is that we think that empathizing is talking about a time that we went through what the other person is experiencing. But this is the opposite of what I talked about in terms of taking accountability. You don't want to talk about yourself in this situation. The other person then might turn around and feel like they need to comfort you. So you're on the right track in terms of thinking about a time that you felt a similar feeling. The only thing I recommend is not to say it out loud quite yet. Okay, so what to do? The good news is that true empathy is actually easier than all of those things I just told you not to do. Step 1, summarize what has been said. This is really easy to do. Don't make it more complicated than it is. It might feel weird in the beginning, but you literally are going to summarize what they say. So what I hear you saying is you're really sad because your cat died. So what I hear you saying is you're really frustrated that the meetings haven't been starting on time. you're not making any other comment other than what they've said. You say what they've said, even if you believe that is an absolute, blatant, and total lie. You just summarize that you're hearing what they're saying. Step 2, validate the emotion that is being expressed. It makes total sense that you feel whatever it is that they're saying. Here's the hard part. It might not make sense to you that the person feels the way he or she does. You might think that he or she shouldn't be upset because it's not that big of a deal. But the key to empathy is not pretending that you would feel the same way. It's understand that the person with whom you are talking truly does feel the way that they feel. And you look at it through their point of view, through their perspective. So it makes sense because you were listening so closely, not because you would feel the same way. So in the beginning, when we're talking about really thinking the cognitive empathy, that's where it might not make sense to you or you wouldn't feel the same way, but you remember, this is an area that this person is particularly sensitive to. Therefore, it makes sense that that person feels the way they feel. Step 3, make sure that the words match the music. This is a picture of the Titanic, I think. So when I was in camp, we used to sing this song that basically was like, it was sad, so sad. It was sad when the great ship went down to the bottom of the husbands and wives. You get the point. Anyway, so the whole idea is that you're talking about something horrifically tragic, but if the words don't match the music, even if you understand and you've got the paraphrasing right, then it's going to be dramatically dismissive to the other person. So the way that you say the words, your tone of voice, connecting to your emotion as you're talking is really going to come through. Versus, it was so sad when the Titanic went down. Husbands, wives, little kids lost their lives. Lots and lots of people died. And that way, it's congruent. The words do match the music. And we need new words for that little song I just sang to you. Sorry about that, by the way. Anyway, so people often believe that it's patronizing to paraphrase, and it will appear patronizing if you don't get step 3 right. If the words aren't matching the music, you're just going to sound like you're going through the motions. Like, oh, Laura Silverstein told me to paraphrase. I hear you saying that you're really frustrated because the meeting didn't, that's the idea. Then you really are going to sound like a parrot, and it's going to come across as if you're just doing a communication skill instead of really doing the work around emotional empathy. That's where the rubber meets the road. Okay, so in the next step, we're going to go ahead and do the practiced exercises. In this section, we are going to be practicing what we've learned about empathy, and I'm going to be giving you different scenarios and go through the practice of the different stages, first with cognitive, then emotional empathy, all the way down to compassion as you're looking at each of these scenarios, and then try to imagine what you would say and write down your response, but also think about the manner that you would use in delivering that message. So the first scenario is your neighbor has just gotten word that her mother has passed away after a long battle with cancer. In the second scenario, a coworker is coming in, just going on and on, complaining about traffic and why meetings shouldn't be scheduled at 10 o'clock in the morning, especially on a Monday. And in the last scenario, you're flying internationally with your cousin, and as soon as the engine turns on, she starts to breathe very heavily and grip the armrest tightly. So think about what you would say and how you would say it. So thanks so much for taking this course all the way through. I really look forward to being in contact back and forth as you're learning these new skills and using the entire community as a resource to practice and grow together. Thanks so much.